All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fourth day of Open Education Week 2024 at NDU. I'm happy to introduce our colleague, Dr. Eugene Sensenig from Faculty of Law and Political Science at NDU, whose insight and passion align perfectly with the core themes we are exploring during Open Education Week 2024. That is, open education resources and open pedagogy. As we embark on this journey of exploration into open educational resources and open pedagogy, Dr. Sensenig brings a unique perspective. I want to call it a unique perspective, shaped by the profound influence of Paulo Freire's critical pedagogy. And as you might know, Paulo Freire was a Brazilian educator and philosopher known for his critical pedagogy, and his most influential work was Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Emphasized the importance of dialogue, critical thinking, and participatory learning in education. He believed in breaking down traditional power structure in education, giving a voice to the learners, and open pedagogy embodies this principle by making education more accessible, participatory, and focused on empowering the learners. Please join me in extending a warm virtual welcome to Dr. Eugene. The floor is yours, Dr. Eugene.
So thank you very much, Dr. Fauzi. This is an honor, and it's also an honor to be part of this series, which is always the first week of March. And we've been doing this at least for 10 years now, and always with a lot of impact for our faculties. So we're very grateful to the Computer Center and the professors there for supporting this over the years, also with the OER committee. Today, I'm going to be picking up on two issues. One is open pedagogy, which is something that we do by default. That's what our event is about, our series is about, and the work of Paulo Freire and one of his contemporaries, Augusto Ball, who created the concept of the theater of the oppressed. So I'm going to open my share now. And here we go. So.
Yeah, it's fine.
Are we now on the full screen?
Yeah,
okay.
It's good. Good enough.
Okay. So what you see here is a new term, actually. We talk about open pedagogy and we talk about pedagogy of the oppressed. But what about open pedagogy of the oppressed, putting the two terms together? That term, this concept does not exist yet. I checked it online. I just want to say that this is a project that we're also working on heavily at the Lebanese Immigration Research Center, not only because one of the ways that immigrants have always interacted is through media, and of course social media is a big issue today, but also education plays a big role in the host countries, being Lebanon in this case, and in the diaspora. And I'll also be dealing with something that's sort of new to us here in our faculty and at LERC, at the Faculty of Law and Political Science, which is open legislative theater. How to use Paulo Freire's and Augusto Ball's approaches in the area of drafting and passing and implementing laws. So the whole political science spectrum. So I'll be following a chronology time-wise. The theater of the oppressed actually predates the pedagogy of the oppressed by concept, but not by term. The term of the oppressed is something that Paulo Freire coined in '68, but Augusto Ball was using the concept as far back as 1956, which is a date which is very dear to my heart because that's the year I was born, so it must mean something. Then Creative Commons, which is of course much newer, is now 23 years old, founded in 2001. And the term open educational resources was used for the first time by UNESCO in 2002. We know that we have a UNESCO chair here in Lebanon, chaired by Dr. Fauzi Baroud, and we're working close with the chair for OER in South Africa, Dr. Dorothy and I'm not going to try to say her family name. Dr. Dorothy is good enough. After doing the introduction, Theater of the Oppressed, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Creative Commons, Open Educational Resources, we'll move on to the Open Pedagogy, which is an approach, which is not a branded name or anything, and then look at, can we actually speak of Open Pedagogy of the Oppressed, sort of combining OER and Freire. And finally, at the very end of the presentation, I'm going to have my students, who are the oppressed, if you will, speak their mind and speak truth to power, which would be me in this case. So we get a little bit of a taste of how that's used in our faculty and at LERC. I just put here on the side, I got two hits when I put Open Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And in both cases, they're not talking about open pedagogy and pedagogy of the oppressed. They're talking about pedagogy of the oppressed, which is open, which is flagrant. So it's actually zero. The term has not yet been used, so we have now coined it for the first time. So theater of the oppressed, as I said, it dates back to 56 as a concept, but actually was used in its current term only in the 70s. The actual wording, theater of the oppressed, goes back to this time. So Augusto Boal started working in the theater in São Paulo. He had to leave Brazil in 71 because the junta, the military regime in Brazil, considered his approach to education to be too free and too democratic. He was tortured, and then he fled and spent the next 15 years until the end of the military dictatorship abroad. And when he came back, he introduced, based on Freire, because Freire had already published by this time, his Theater of the Oppressed. And as you can see here, it says Teatro Legislativo. I'm not going to try to even get close to Portuguese. Spanish is hard enough. But the theater of the legislative theater is an attempt, and we'll see in a moment, to actually discuss problems, draft laws, support their passing, and more importantly, or equally important, follow up on the implementation. We know that in Lebanon, passing a law is one thing, having it implemented is another. So when you have this groundswell of public participation in the legislative process using Freire and Augusto Boal, we have very good results that are tangible in Brazil, which is a country that shares a lot of the problems that Lebanon has. So who is Augusto Boal? He was a city councilman. He was a theater person, but he was also an elected member of the Rio de Janeiro City Council. And in that position, he would go out into his constituency, to where his voters lived, get their opinions on the problems in the city, which is, of course, I think it's the second largest city in Brazil after São Paulo, then ask them how to create laws, to draft laws and get them passed. And he used the term transitive democracy, which lies between direct democracy. We know that in ancient Greece, but also it was implemented for many centuries in Switzerland, and delegate democracy, which we will deal with later. The actual use of parliament, and that parliaments are not always the best thing we can see very well in Lebanon. So how do you use theater to actually get the oppressed, get the population to discuss laws, pass them, and monitor their implementation? Here a little bit of an overview of the different concepts, but legislative of theater is one of them. And Freire and Augusto Boal initiated a large number of initiatives to get the people involved in culture and education, which is our topic today, and politics, which is the topic for us in our faculty. So, excuse me, we can look back now on a half a century of pedagogy of the oppressed. It was published in 68, which was, of course, a very important year for change, not only in Europe and Latin America and North America, but also in the Near East, in the Middle East, or we often call it now West Asia, the WANA region. So, according to Freire, the tools of the oppressors in education, but also in the media, are anti-dialogical. Their actions are based on a one-way flow of information. We tell you what's right, and you do it in the teaching situation, and you give it back on test day. And you can see here the use of the funnel here, which we'll come back to. According to Freire, we have to have dialogical actions. And I have to mention care here, because when I came to NDU back in 2001 as a part-timer, I Googled Paulo Freire in Lebanon, and immediately I got a hit for CARE, the Center for Applied Research and Education that Dr. Kamal Abou-Shdid is the director of, and he was back then as well, pushing Paulo Freire. So Paulo Freire has been at NDU for over 2 decades. How can the oppressed truly liberate themselves, is the question Freire asks. He says through dialogue. Dialogical actions require unity, compassion, organization, and cultural synthesis. What does he mean by that? First of all, we have to work together on projects if we want to change anything. Then compassion. In research, we call it effectiveness. And I'll get back to this with my students at the end of the presentation. Should research care? Or should we be objective and say the results are irrelevant? Should research be objective or subjective? Is subjectivity a research asset? Third, organization. Once we know what we want to do, we have to go out and do it in groups. And finally, cultural synthesis, which means we have to dialogue and bring these attributes together. So one of the big issues that has always come up is what happens when a liberation movement wins? How do the oppressed deal with their liberators? And Freire very clearly pointed out that when a revolution or a reform movement succeeds, the people who come to power often are just as bad as the previous group of scoundrels. And I'm putting here up a refrain from a song that my students were using back in 2005, 2006, when there was that little mini Woodstock after the assassination of Hariri on Martyrs Square, where they were camping out, and they'd come to class in the morning after having slept out on the Martyrs Square all night. Even the girls didn't have their makeup on, which is a unique sign of dedication for NDU students. And the song went, "We don't get fooled again." And the song ends, it's by The Who, "Meet the new boss, same as the old boss." How do we prevent that from happening? We need, according to Freire, ongoing dialogue, which means that the process which is implemented to critique oppression and critique poor communication and poor education has to continue in the area of education, in the area of culture, in workplace relationships, which is often forgotten. The workplace is a big area for human rights and for freedom. And of course, finally, political action. Okay, so this concept that Freire developed, which is the banking system, the professor deposits something in the brains of the students and then withdraws it for the test or for the final, is not something that Freire actually cooked up himself. It goes way back to Michel de Montaigne in his book on education of children in 1580, where he uses the funnel system. And I love this diagram. It's from a German caricature from the 18th century, showing how proper education works. The children sit there and the funnel gives them the truth. So I put this in most of my syllabi, referencing Freire, and I've always been keen on pointing out the development from Michel de Montaigne 500 years ago and Freire 50 years ago. So it's a continuation, not that much has actually changed. So a new concept for us, now we're getting back to the application of, once we've criticized education or criticized communication, criticized political discussions, what do we do about it? And Augusto Boal created the concept of the theater of the oppressed. Now, you can read about theater of the oppressed and read about legislative theater and read Freire and Boal, but actually experiencing it for the first time is a little bit mind-blowing, because in the end you think, yeah, Yanni, is that going to really work? And I mean, the thing about Lebanon is you think you should know everybody. We had to go to Lithuania, to Klaipėda on the coast of the Baltic Sea, to run into Rafi Fagali, who's Lebanese. And he is a big proponent. Here you can see us sitting together here, Rafi, Dr. Ruba, and myself. He did this amazing performance at this conference on story shaping peace in 2022, 2 years ago. which actually illustrated to us how this works. And to our surprise, it actually, it's not just something you have on paper, it actually was convincing. So we came back converted, if you will, to something we had known in an abstract manner to something we had now seen in action. Now, a little bit of the political science side of things. Now, as a good researcher, you check Lao Tse and to see if he ever really said this. And Lao Tse wrote one book, the Tao Te Ching, and it's not in there. So Lao Tse never said, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach him how to fish, and you can feed him for a lifetime. But why let the truth get in the way of a good story? And this is what Lao Tse supposedly said and thought. What I added is don't forget to teach him about the monopoly rights of the fishing industry. What good is education when we don't look at the social and political and technological and industrial context? So moving on. One of my favorite Brazilians, along with Freire and Paulo, is a Brazilian archbishop by the name of Helder Camara, who famously said, it's not enough to help poor people. Caritas, charity, is as old as our species. The humankind has always been benevolent, as far back as we can tell. Margaret Mead once said that her definition of the beginning of civilization is when she found in an ancient burial site a leg which had been healed, which someone had taken the time to let the broken bone grow back together, which meant that for the first time we had caring. So caritas, caring, is as old as our species. However, that's not enough. We have to ask why people need help, why they are poor. And here Freire, who was definitely not a communist, he was a Catholic archbishop, said, I'm accused when I point out the causes of injustice and the causes of poverty and exploitation of being a communist. Now let's go back to the real thing. When Marx refers to philosophers, he doesn't mean philosophers in the modern sense. He means the lovers of knowledge. A better translation for the current day would be scientists or researchers. So let's take researchers. The researchers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. So here we have it coming from the other end. With Helder Camara, we're helping the poor, but now we have to ask why. Where's the knowledge? And here we have it from Marx the other direction. We're asking why all the time, but we're not actually doing anything about it. So both of them are coming together, converging in a common shared point. And that common shared point, in my opinion, is Martin Luther King. So we had a Catholic, then we had a Marxist or atheist, and now we have a Protestant. Martin Luther King said, when you're going out and changing the world, direct action, going out and burning tires or whatever you do when you do direct action, there are 3 steps before that. One is research, to know what the problems are and that they actually exist. The second one is self-purification, which I'd love to talk about, but I won't right now. What is your motivation for doing this? And only then, after you've done the research, after you've tried to negotiate, and it doesn't work, and you've purified yourself and your motives, then you can go out and try to change the world. So we see here again the strong emphasis on the link between the social context and education and research. So now back to Creative Commons and open educational resources. Today is not International Women's Day, that's tomorrow, but I'll put Elinor Ostrom in the center of attention. She was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize for economics, so she's definitely a hero for the 8th of March. And this GCGM is a small organization that Dr. Ruba El Hello and I founded. I've done a lot of research, field research and applied research. And let's look at what Ostrom is famous for. Most of us, when we think of Creative Commons, we think back to the tragedy of the commons. And this is where Tony Haj, differ. And maybe he can weigh in and tell me why I'm wrong, and I'll tell him why he's wrong. But the tragedy of the commons, according to Garrett Hardin, is a problem because we have overgrazing. I'll just show you here. We have overgrazing, and in the end, everybody suffers. So this is what Elinor Ostrom is trying to challenge. She's saying that self-interest does not always have to be selfish. And for the Creative Commons, to the commons of knowledge and culture, this is definitely the case. So what Tony pointed out when I tried to do this the very first time, like 10 years ago, he said, yeah, but that's not right. When you overgraze or overfish, or you cut down too many trees, you ruin your commons, your natural commons. But with the creative commons, it's not the case. And I said, you're right. The more we use the information online, the more valuable it becomes, the richer it becomes. However, how did it get there in the first place? Somebody has to upload it. And this is the problem in our region, in the West Asia, North Africa region. We do a lot of downloading. I'm not going to call it parasitic, but I'm going to say it's definitely not self-destructive, but self-defeating if we only always download stuff and never upload stuff of our own. Talk about a north-south discrepancy. We have to have our own voices where our professors and our artists upload the same kind of quality online that we're downloading from the global north. And this is where I fully agree with Elinor Ostrom that the commons, the knowledge commons, can have a crisis. It can have a stagnation. This is, I think, the term that Tony and I agreed on. There's a stagnation of the commons if we do not upload stuff from our region. So now let's see what we're doing, actually. Let's bring Paulo Freire Baul and Augusto Baul and Elinor Ostrom together. The open pedagogy of oppression versus governing the knowledge commons, as Ostrom said. Self-governing mechanisms are in our natural instincts, according to her. And I'm going to show you how legislative theater can play a role here in Lebanon. One of them is the issue of the Armenian genocide. You can see the monument that was put up in Muzeler or Muzadek in Turkey, in today's Hatay, which was occupied by the Armenians who survived the genocide between 2019 and 2039 when it was given to Turkey. The Muzadek project has been going on since 2010 with students from NDU and students from High Gazian University. And what are we working on now? We're working on intergenerational trauma, which was our initial concern, our fourth generation. We need policies and laws to deal with this, but also the whole sticky question of reparations. Even when you commit genocide, you have to pay reparations. The policies necessary for there, students can get involved in this. Second one is education policy in the peripheral areas. We're working with a NDU graduate. I think he's with us now, Wadia, who's got several prizes from the UN for a development project from architecture for young people in Akkar, which is the most underdeveloped part of Lebanon, for water management, waste management, energy, and small projects which give young people hope. Why does that interest lurk? Because we want to prevent forced emigration. So here again, trying to draft concepts using a theater of legislative theater approach. Two more. Food, for those of you who are in that field, we did a very nice event with the Faculty of Nursing and Health Science here at NDU with FLIPS and with LAU on food sovereignty, bringing in the students. We've actually been working on this since 2003. The NDU students were the first to introduce fair trade to Lebanon, and we're working now on policies, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Then in oil and natural gas, some of you might know that the labor code in Lebanon bans, and I like the way they're put together here, children, youth, and women, because it's somehow the same category of people. They're all banned from working in unhealthy and unsafe heavy industry. And that law has to change, especially now with the online sector, the offshore sector, excuse me. Just as a reference, we have a fully blended OER course in our faculty, Ethics and Leadership, since 2014. The course is, I've been teaching the course since 2010. And you can see here that over the decades, now we have, this is a closed group, so it's, you can join it, but it's not, this is the big problem. When you use Facebook, if you have open groups, you have all kinds of people joining. You have closed groups, it's not really OER. So we blend the institutional repository with YouTube, with Facebook, with Google Docs, and have sort of a semi-satisfactory approach. This is a very old and well-established course, which has everything, including the lectures, the 16 lectures online. So now, how do we draft new laws and policies through legislative theater and enhance youth engagement? Let's look here at the model youth parliament. The model youth parliament sees parliamentary democracy as the highest form of political participation. Legislative theater says no to that. It doesn't say that it's not important. It's really important. I'm an American, as you can probably hear, and our parliamentary elections in the US this fall are going to be very important. I'm not negating that. I'm just saying that's definitely not enough. And this is what Augusto Boal pointed out. And this is what I'm pointing out. Along with the parliament, the youth parliament in Lebanon, we need to, here they say, for the first time ever, our student MPs will embark on the pivotal journey of electing a president mirroring the heart of Lebanese democracy. That's the question. Is that the heart? It's really important, but is it the heart? So what do Aristotle and Socrates have to say? This is a e-course that we've developed, and I will be giving the PowerPoint to Fauzi. You can click on these things. As you can see, Socrates is pointing up and saying culture is really important. Aristotle's pointing down and saying also the base, industry, commerce, science, the military, trade, manufacturing. These two things go hand. So this dialogue between the two, the base superstructure dialectic is essential when we're studying this, and it's essential when we're using Freire and Boal, trying to speak truth to power and to try to move on from a situation of being the oppressed. So some examples, new laws and policies that we can work on. We are already working on the labor code, the 1946 labor code, which bans children, youth, and women from heavy industry. We're working with our students on that. This is one of the recent publications from the GCGM, which includes that topic. We're drafting a new comprehensive education policy with emphasis on blended learning with some colleagues from youth organizations and from political parties. We started that in 2016, and we're moving on with that. As I mentioned before, the intergenerational trauma and reparations discussion. I mean, think of a country that was recently accused of committing genocide, and if that case goes against them, they will have to pay reparations. Just think where that could take us. Then using the politics of political economy of sectarianism and coexistence, this policy here, together with Ostrom, Boal, and Freire. What is the base superstructure? Just as a background, base superstructure, for those who are not aware of this dialectical approach, the base is industry, commerce, technology, the military, the superstructure is education, religion, family, and they dialogue. It's not a one-way, so we can see this goes back and forth. People who overemphasize the superstructure would say that in Lebanon we have all these problems, and because Lebanese just can't get it right, and it's our fault. Let's go look at the base. Let's look at who's paying for this and who's earning money from this situation. And then let's look how the two sides dialogue, and then we'll probably understand more and that the situation is indeed not helpless. And I think that in two areas that I know of, which is fair trade farming and sustainable tourism, we have hope for overcoming sectarianism and promoting coexistence from an economic perspective. So this is a little diagram of the future of Lebanon based on this political economy of coexistence where we can all work together. Now, you might wonder what that is. That's a symbol for the Armenians. We were looking for an Armenian symbol, and some Armenian friend says it's a pomegranate, stupid. So there you go. So these are the symbols of the peoples of Lebanon, the diversity. And finally, the last step. And now I'm going to be an oppressive professor and tell my students that they have to weigh in on this. I want to talk about a very oppressive experience, which we're now going through in our faculty, which is for the first time writing a BA thesis. Now, writing a habilitation, which is common in Europe, which is a pre-doctoral degree in research endeavor, which makes you an associate professor or a PhD dissertation or an MA thesis, they all sort of go, they're like a hierarchy. But can we take that hegemony and force it on the BA thesis students? Well, that's exactly what I'm doing, using a very famous author, Umberto Eco, and I'm telling my students to talk back on this. And so I'm curious to see what they have to say in the discussion. The second thing is, what are the hot topics? When you're doing a BA thesis, one of the things that students have to agree on is, should research be objective? Now, if you're in the natural sciences, if you're in the exact sciences, the so-called hard sciences, which means, of course, that things like communications or political science or advertising and marketing are soft sciences. But in those so-called hard or exact sciences, being objective seems to be a no-brainer. But is it actually possible to be objective in the natural sciences and humanities? Or isn't the subjectivity actually a research asset? You can't do both. They're mutually exclusive. Students have to make a decision. And I tell my students, when confronted with this dichotomy of one or the other, if you don't choose, you'll choose by default. If you don't choose a theory will choose you, and you'll probably follow the path of least resistance, which is the objective approach, which is the majority of social scientists. But don't say that you made a decision. The decision was made for you. Another one is reactivity and effectiveness. These are two topics that we use a lot in our faculty. How do the subjects we are studying react to us? So the population you're studying might change from the beginning of the research process to the end. But again, how do you change? And as Paulo Freire said, where's the compassion? Where is the way you and the research subjects interact? And so then I'm going to ask my students now, because I am done. Yes. So I am going to ask my students, who a lot of them are here, to say something, but I also want to turn it over to Fauzi for the discussions. So I would say, students, feel free to weigh in whenever you have something to say. And also, Wadia, if you're here, please also tell us about Article. I can't hear you, Fauzi.
And thank you so much, Eugene, for this wonderful presentation. I'll open the floor now for any question you might have. Just raise your hand and I'll give you the floor. Question to Dr. Eugene. Dr. Kamal Abu Shteed, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Eugene, for this interesting presentation, and it really touches my heart when someone tries to analyze the liberation pedagogy of Paulo Freire. It was really amazing that in 2001 or in 2002 we had Paulo Freire as a role model for our work at the Center for Education Research, Applied Research and Education. I would like to, in addition to what you said, to try to link a little bit the liberation pedagogy and liberation education, or the emancipatory discourse of Paulo Freire in relation to the culture and the movement of openness, particularly in education. The liberation from the oppressors-oppressed relationship, breaking that chain of relationship between the teacher, the oppressor, and the student, the oppressed in Freire's terms. I would like to first say something, that Paulo Freire was imprisoned in Brazil because of his emancipatory pedagogy, and his praxis or methodology was used in Guinea-Bissau, and they were able to, through using his praxis, to liberate from the Portuguese occupation. And I would like to add that during the revolution in Egypt, when the Egyptian citizens toppled Muhammad Morsi, groups there, revolutionaries, were reading Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and his book with Macedo, Literacy, Reading the Word and the World. And also they were reading along the line Jacques Rancière, The Ignorant Schoolmaster, 5 Lessons in Intellectual Emancipation. So that said, I would like to mention that the starting premise of Paulo Freire's book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, was based on the notion that education is suffering from narration sickness. Education is suffering from alienating verbosity. These are his exact words in chapter 2. Now, if we try to link his ideas and his emancipatory pedagogy to open education movement, we find a lot of analogies. For example, if we see the banking system of education, we'll find that Paulo Freire was really militated against notions that the teacher knows everything and the student knows nothing. Also against the notion that the teacher teaches and the student is taught about. And therefore the student is incapacitated, not capacitated, decapacitated. Now, if you look at the educational, open educational resources movement and the open pedagogy, you will find how really it centers on the student engagement in learning, in creating new knowledge, in localizing knowledge, therefore focusing on the indigenous knowledge creation. That is fighting against colonial education. I think you mentioned this colonial education in the book, right, in your chapter. So really, there are a lot of common points between the open movement, the democratization of education, the widening of access to education and educational resources that are free and away from commercialization, into a different discourse that really is accessible to all and participatory, and the participation here is symmetrical. No hierarchies in the process, and this is what we are trying to instep in the OER here in Lebanon. Dr. Baroud and I and with Dr. Abdel Noor and many others really are working on this, and you with us as well as a team, working on this liberation pedagogy in a way using the tools that are appropriate to meet the student learning needs from an indigenous perspective, from a participatory perspective, and so on. So this is really my immediate take, and I would like also to mention that in some of the projects that Dr. Baroud did in Lebanon was to reach out to the marginalized groups in the Bekaa Plain, in Deir al-Ahmar, where you have around 50 school teachers were trained there, and those teachers were really deprived from professional development opportunities. And that notion of reaching out to the marginalized and capacitating them is also at the heart of Freirean emancipatory pedagogy. So there are a lot of things really to derive from the pedagogy of the oppressed and the literacy, reading the word and the world. and let's move ahead with our project on open educational resources, open pedagogy, and so on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is a sort of testimonial, really.
Thank you, Dr. Abushir. Thank you so much for sharing. I have a question from Dr. Haj Thanos. Go ahead, please.
It's not really a question, but a comment, if I may.
Go ahead, Thomas.
Okay. Eugene, I would like to remind you of the book I pointed out to you on Ostrom. I will talk a little bit, some quote, and I will comment on it. In the open access commons, free use is pre-authorized. It's an enhanced or tragedy-proof commons because it is non-rivalrous. In other words, the non-rivalrous character of the open access literature insulates it from the classical forms of the tragedy of commons and explains why it's fundamentally unlike grazing land. But it's not proof against other tragedies. It's vulnerable, or at least apparently vulnerable, to several kinds of vicious circles. In other words, if you have the classical commons, if you use it, you deplete it. But in the form of knowledge, if you use it, you enrich it. However, this does not mean it's not really a tragedy. It's a tragedy in other forms. For instance, let's distinguish tragic depletion from what could be called tragic stalemates, or what I coined as stagnation of the commons. Because a tragic depletion is a classic tragedy of the commons. The village green is overgrazed and depleted by unrestrained use. A tragic stalemate or stagnation occurs when many separate individuals or organizations want to make the same decision, but none wants to go first. In other words, if there is a university and they have something great that they come up, they don't want to make it for free. And this is really a tragedy, because this will impede the spread of knowledge, because none of the university, if they find something of interest to them, wants to provide it for free, because they don't get a return. That's why they like to publish it. In fact, the result is not the destruction of a common good, but a paralysis that prevents otherwise motivated players from creating common good. In other words, other universities, if they're not going to get a return from their investment, they're not going to do it. For instance, in a classic tragedy, which we have in biology, of depletion, individual users have incentive to deplete because they get more money, more grass for their cows. Even to deplete what they argue is useful. In fact, in a tragic stalemate or stagnation, what I call stagnation, individuals have an incentive to wait or delay their knowledge. They have an incentive to wait or delay their knowledge, even to delay creating what they agree is useful. In fact, the first perversely kills what is already valuable. In other words, if you have cows, when the cows kill the grass, and it's not because all of them eat at the same time and they deplete it. However, in the commons, the second perversely prevents something valuable from coming into being. In other words, the tragedy comes from the fact that people are reluctant to provide this common because there is no reward for them. This is my point.
Thank you, Tanush. Thank you so much. Eugene, you have 1 minute. You want to say something in return? Because I want to open the floor. We still have...
Yeah, very briefly. This is...
I want to open... yeah, go ahead, Eugene.
Yeah, 30 seconds. I just want to say I'm very grateful to Tony for our constant butting of heads against each other, because the more we knock our heads against each other, the smarter we get. And this stagnation of the commons, which he coined, as far as I know, is a very important thing. It's not depletion, but it's a lack of feeding the commons, which is the problem in our region. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. I want to open the floor for our student, our dear student. You know, I have a couple of students, you know, are here. If they want to comment, they want to ask questions, please go ahead.
The last two slides were questions directed to, which were posed directly for the students. How do they experience the pedagogy of the oppressed in open education in our classroom? So go for it.
Maybe you have to call them by name, Eugene. You know your students.
I was reluctant to do that because that would be then the oppressive nature of that Paulo Freire was complaining about.
Yeah,
but I will ask Hadi to. Hadi's hands up. Hadi, go for it. Hadi, thank you.
We have Hadi. Okay, go ahead, Hadi.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this session. So for the thesis class, how I can relate the pedagogy of the oppressed to it, it is by, for example, we start from the habilitation of the hierarchy from above to down, from habilitation, then to the PhD thesis, then the master thesis, then the BA thesis. So who made that hierarchy, and why we should all follow it? How we know this is the right way? So this is the kind of question we should be asking, not in the sense just to say it's wrong, but to know about it, not just it being imposed on us. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Hadi. Thank you. Do you have anything to say, Eugene?
I agree, obviously, and I mean, ultimately, as professors, I mean, I'm using the comparison of I'm a beginner's tango instructor, and when I start students off with tango, I'm very authoritarian because they don't know a thing, right? So they have to follow me. But once they get a little bit more advanced, they should be able to act on their own, if we use that tango analogy. So I agree with Hadi on this one, for sure. But then he has to, of course, discuss the alternatives. Now I'd like to ask Lean, because she's not going to raise her hand, who's working on a topic which is very dear to her heart. What is the difference between objective and subjective science? And should we actually take a position, take a stance in our research, or should we try to be distanced and be clean like physicists or chemists? Lean.
Hey, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Lean. Yeah, we can hear you well.
Okay, so the difference between objective research and subjective research. Subjective research is when we care about the research we're in. It's when we care about the topic we're researching. It's when we care about what we're learning and the people we're connecting with. And when we stand on an objective matter, we're just distant from the topic itself. So after Paulo Freire's research, I figured out that I actually had a very subjective matter in my topic, a very subjective stance, because I'm working on the difficulties facing women diplomats in the Arab world, and it is something that I really care about, because I would dream to be a woman diplomat myself one day, and I would love not to have the barriers and challenges in this matter just because of caregiving. So yes, I am in a very subjective stance, and I think that research can be objective. However, I think it would be very, very richer if it is done in a subjective way. Thank you.
Thank you, Lean. Thank you so much. Any other questions? You know, we still have 3-4 minutes. If not, I have a question for Eugene.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the common obstacles or resistance you have encountered in advocating for and implementing these principles at NDU? And more importantly, you know, how educators and institutions effectively can overcome these challenges to create a more open and inclusive learning environment, in your opinion?
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking that question, because the first obstacle that we've been discussing together for the last 10 years at least is we need a dedicated platform in the faculty and in the university for our OER material. I remember when we started discussing this, the very first event on Creative Commons that we had at NDU was in 2010. And back then, even they were telling us Creative Commons is important, OER is more important for universities. And I got, let's focus on Creative Commons. But then I realized what OER is by doing a Google search. And if you go to MIT or other sort of flagship universities in the US for OER, they have an entire section on their website dedicated to entire OER courses. And we discussed this on Monday with South Africa, that they're having the same problem, that it really depends on the professor who is the activist, together, of course, with the computer center, linking the various platforms together, but there's not one, and the IR, the institutional repository, cannot be it, and I think Amin agrees. Another barrier, I think, is that if we move on from OER to the pedagogy of the oppressed, is that in general, we do have this sort of frontal approach. I actually bought a huge image, a huge funnel from a store, and I put it on my head and say, this is how I'm going to teach this semester. I'm just going to dump information in your head and you're going to give it to me by the end of the semester. And we'll start off by asking which color is the wall. And by the third or fourth week, they know the proper answer is whatever I say.
Yeah.
So I try to teach them by being absurd. By being absurd, you guys have to question all of the concepts that are being taught to you one by one. And here, I think the context is a little bit difficult because that's not what they experience in their real lives, that they're allowed to speak truth to power. So I think, and this is where where the Center for Applied Research in Education has been doing a great job, and where Kamal, through his focus on, I mean, we're talking about 22 years where CARE has been focusing on Paulo Freire, where we can really move ahead together, where all the other faculties can move ahead with the education professors to promote this sort of practiced. And the final one is service learning, which I know that Kamal's now going to be unhappy again. Service learning is what we're doing with Wadia and Akar, is taking 4-credit courses and going out in the field. It's not community service and it's not field research. It's together. It's one thing together. And this is where I think when the students get out in the field, then they realize that any sort of top-down authoritarian approach doesn't work, because the material world has no patience with inapplicable approaches. So I would say the three: one is we need the platform. Now that everything's on cloud, we should be able to do it. Second, promoting Freire through CARE. And the third is the service learning projects.
Thank you, Eugene. I think, we have no more questions. I want to thank you all
We have one guest from South Africa, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, but no more questions. Yeah.
Is that
Modest.
Yes, Mpoentle, yes. Thank you so much. From the University of South Africa, I'm interested in the work of Paulo Freire so much, and I was just sitting here. Even my daughter was angry with me. She's doing a master's in international relations. She's asking me, why did you not tell me about this? It's quite interesting to know that we're moving into really the open pedagogy, and from South Africa, from the apartheid context, this discussions are really important. And I like that you say that students need to come to a point where they question every concept. We need to give them the freedom to interact with us or with the professors like yourselves at that level. But thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Modest. Thank you so much, and we're happy you are here with us today. Any other questions? If not, we'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we have the last session, the last day of Open Education Week, the role of libraries in promoting open education resources. And we're going to be listening to Dr. Amin Musa from the library, telling us all the good things, what NDU, what Notre Dame University is doing in this regard. Thank you again, Eugene. Thank you, Dr. Kamal. Thank you, all participants. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a good day.
Goodbye.
Have a good day.
Thank you.